When I was 4 years old, my brothers left on an LDS mission. So they were twins. I had twins. We're the oldest in our family. And so it was a big deal to have the house change. The house was different. And I can't remember what happened first, whether they left or my dad's dad passed away suddenly and surprisingly. And I have a really vivid memory of being in the hallway down in the basement and the phone call. I don't have it's not a vivid memory, actually. I can just sense that feeling. I know there's one picture there, but I don't remember exactly what was said. I remember kind of a little bit of surprise, or and I don't know if it was my mom talking about it to someone else, but I just have that. And then about a year and a half later, my mom's mom, Goldie, passed away. And I, to this day, can set myself in the room with her coffin and seeing her. That is very, very vivid to me. And so I would have been about five at that time. And they had just moved just a few blocks from our home, maybe 2 years before. And so I was able to kind of be with her that last little while more than I ever had before, although I was still young. I mean, I was young. I was kindergarten. I remember needing to, I don't know if the funeral was done yet or if it was in between the death and the funeral, but me and my sister had to be at their little apartment, my grandparents' apartment, and they had gone to do something, probably to go pick out the casket and things like that. I have no idea, but we stayed at their apartment for some reason. And I can vividly remember the pattern of the chair that we were sitting on. We were in like a recliner. I think my sister was sitting in the recliner and I was on the armrest of the recliner. And I remember out of the corner of my eye just seeing my grandma walk out of the bedroom area across the living room area. She was wearing this outfit that it was the early 80s, so she had like the polyester pants with the line down the front, very polyester button-up shirt with white, and it was kind of a stunning moment. And I remember thinking at the time, did I just make that up? And it happened so fast, but even still, my memory, it's in slow motion. Like, I remember it vividly. And I don't know how long it took for me to tell my mom that story. But I remember her reaction just being tender and feeling like she believed me, I guess. And I didn't remember this, but I was talking to my cousin a couple of years ago, and he says, I remember you having those kinds of experiences when you were a kid. He says, and he told me a story of my mom. We're out looking at fireworks or out looking at the clouds or something. I don't know exactly. And that my mom had said, that I had said something like, and over there, that's where grandma is. And my mom's like, yep. But I did know that from then on, I would have conversations with my grandma. I remember so many times sitting there and like talking inside my mind to my grandma, sometimes tattling on my mom. But I remember she was a go-to person for me. And I always just thought, that's so sweet, until, after our rupture, people started sharing some of their stories, and it sounded very familiar to my stories. And they were calling them things I'd never called them anything before. And they would bring up other things, and I would have other memories of things and just say, oh, that's a thing. I didn't realize I was having those experiences. And what we kind of want to talk about today is kind of centered around the book Childhood Disrupted. And Childhood Disrupted was a pivotal book for our growth and learning, our repair, I think, without a doubt.
This was one of the books when, I think a week or two before I got upset with Jackie, we'd been in therapy several months, maybe 3, 4, 5 months. And I said, we're not making progress, Jackie. We need some help. And Jackie said, hey, we need to get some steadiness in the present before we can go back and look at the things in the past. Which is funny because we never really went back and looked at things in the past because they didn't matter that much.
Right.
At least weren't the important stuff.
Right. Our fights, like, let's figure out this fight. Who wins this fight?
Who wins? Exactly. Oh, gosh. And I remember in the first few months of therapy, always pushing Jackie, should we stay together? Should we even try? Are we compatible? And she would never answer.
Yeah.
So frustrating. Also really good.
Right.
Yeah. So a week or two after that, I said, hey, do you have any books you might recommend for us? And that's when she suggested Janice Webb, Dr. Janice Webb, Running on Empty. And then she suggested Childhood Disrupted as well.
Who wrote that book? I know you know.
Yeah, Donna Jackson Nakazawa.
Yeah, you can rattle that off so well. Yeah. And so we already had Running on Empty. So you actually started with Childhood Disrupted, started reading that book, listening to it.
Yes.
On Audible. And
yeah, I did.
Yeah, you just listened to it by yourself at first. I remember, I remember you calling me from the mountain. You were on a
gone up on a hike on the mountain.
Mm-hmm.
And I had my headphones in and I was just listening to the Audible of it. Mm-hmm. And she's talking about difficult things that happen to children affect their adult lives.
Yeah.
And it was about affecting their bodies, how the chemicals and such, we'll get into that, how your body is affected. And I just thought about, my finger getting cut off. And this was early December when we had this discussion and started the book. I was out on the hike. And that was what spurred me to go talk to my aunt. If you remember from the previous episode about talking about when my finger got cut off, that's what spurred me to talk to my aunt. I talked to my parents to try to get some more information about what happened in that time frame. What happened to me in the hospital? How did I react? I wanted to get some more detail, which didn't ever come. Mm-hmm. But that's kind of what spurred it, was listening to this book up on a hike in the mountains with my dog.
Yep. And knowing that things that happened then affect you as an adult, not just like memory based, or not just like that. Yeah, that was a sad time, but like that It's changing your physiology.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. And so the ACE score is a big part of this book. And
That's
so
right.
Let's talk about that.
Some of you are probably wondering, why are we talking about our childhoods? Why are we talking about this in a relationship podcast, in a mental health podcast? What's going on? And we're talking about it because it does affect us. And this book, Childhood Disrupted, really lays out the case really well, why it affected us. And then knowing that we're affected by these things in the past can help us adjust our responses in the present to help us feel more connected so that we can enjoy that ever after. So that's why we're talking about it. It's super important and it's valuable. So stay tuned.
We're going to go through there's 2 halves of the book. Monty's going to take the first half of the book, which is understanding what he kind of talked about. And then the second half of the book that was really impactful for our relationship and really changed the dynamic of our relationship is that second half of the book. And then I'll talk about that. So, yeah. So where do we begin?
What we learned in the book is that the mind-body connection is so much more powerful than we previously understood. There's the Adverse Childhood Experiences Survey, which can If you have high adverse childhood experiences, it can lead to chronic inflammation, altered brain structure, increased risk for various physical and mental health issues in adulthood like autoimmune diseases, heart disease, cancer, depression and anxiety, and substance abuse disorders. And the ACE score is just a series of 10 questions about what happened in your childhood. It also talks in this book about epigenetic changes, which are caused by early stress, can alter how your genes are expressed and affects the body, how it responds to stressors. It creates a biological blueprint that can predispose individuals to illness and affect their relationships, parenting skills, and overall quality of life. So when we're born, who we are isn't set. It's kind of has a direction, but it's changed throughout our life as we respond to the kind of life that we live. And that makes us more successful at life. So having early adverse childhood experiences change who we are on a fundamental level. It changes how our brain works, how our body works. Here's a quote from the book. Your emotional biography becomes your physical biology, and together they write much of the script of how you will live your life.
Yeah. And because we can change, it changes us, then there's the opportunity to change again. So that's the good, that's the hopeful part of that story.
That's right.
But it really does, the idea that your biology changes through experience is something that I don't know if we really understand as a society. I don't think we really understand the long-term effects of what can happen in our childhood. And then, of course, you can have traumatic events as an adult too. But in the childhood, they impact much bigger processes and that biology.
Right. So let's get into the ACE score. Here's a quote. Time does not heal all wounds. One does not just get over something, not even 50 years later. Which means it has lasting consequences.
Right.
So there was a groundbreaking study conducted by Dr. Vincent Folletti and Dr. Robert Anda, and it revealed that 64% of adults experienced at least one ACE, which is adverse childhood experience. 40% experienced two or more, and ACE scores correlate directly with adult health problems. The background behind this was he was working with women who were trying to lose weight and finally got to talking about what their childhood was like and noticed a trend. They have trauma. So that's how he ended up developing this 10-question ACE score.
I think California, I believe, was one of the first states to start including the ACE score in pediatric care, and really paying attention to that. And that was just a few years ago. So this study, I think, happened in the 90s, I want to say. And we just haven't grabbed on to this information as a society. And I don't know if we still have.
Right. So the types of questions in the ACE study are talking about emotional, physical, or sexual abuse, emotional or physical neglect, and household dysfunction, which is like parental separation or substance abuse or mental illness. So each time you answer yes on one of those 10 questions, it increases your ACE score. So individuals with an ACE score of 4 or higher are 460% more likely to be depressed.
Yeah.
They're 1,220% more likely to attempt suicide. These ACE scores affect us.
Mm-hmm.
And
those are just double.
They're huge.
Huge.
Yeah. I mean, seriously, there's probably not a lot of people that are attempting suicide that have a 0 ACE scores.
Right.
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 Because their lives are pretty good.
Yeah.
I don't know anyone with a 0 ACE score.
Because we don't have the structure set up for that, at least here in the States yet.
Right. She talks about this thing called chronic unpredictable stress, toxic stress, CUTS, she calls it, CUTS. Chronic unpredictable stress can trigger a process of low-grade inflammation within the brain.
Wow.
our brains are adaptable, which is called neuroplasticity, and it allows our brain to adapt to experiences that are positive and negative. So if you have chronic, unpredictable, toxic stress, you can have reduced gray matter, an overactive amygdala, which is your fear center, and impaired hippocampus function. So your memory and emotional regulation are reduced from what they would have been if you didn't have this chronic, unpredictable, toxic stress. But I think the most important thing for me is it alters my default mode network. So what is a default mode network? It's your sense of who you are, your sense of self, your sense of safety, just when everything is kind of just normal, how things are. And that having that changed, there's kind of like a set point. And when you experience toxic stress, it can raise and never come down. Say when you're idling your engine, let's say it idles around 1,000 RPM, a person, if they were an engine who experienced chronic, unpredictable, toxic stress, their engine might be idling at 2,000, 2,500. It's in sport mode, ready to go, right?
Right.
And that kind of adaptation over your lifetime affects your physiology.
The engine's going to run out faster.
Exactly. And we see this all the time. Mm-hmm. So these changes result in a dysregulated stress response system, which means you have heightened reactivity to stress, you have difficulty managing emotions, increased risk for mental health disorders, compromised immune function, and chronic inflammation. And I have one more point here in this academic section. Thanks for staying with me. I know it's a lot. Women suffer from Hashimoto's thyroiditis at a rate of 10 to 1 compared to men, and lupus 9 to 1. Right. Females are more vulnerable to the effects of childhood adversity. They're very sensitive, and the baseline differences make females more susceptible. They have higher baseline of levels of stress hormones, greater impact on brain regions evolved in emotion regulation, increased risk for autoimmune diseases and depression, and social factors also are a contributor to this problem. That women experience higher rates of sexual abuse and other forms of victimization, greater exposure to interpersonal stressors, and societal expectations and gender roles are different for women than men. So for each ACE a woman experiences, her risk of being hospitalized for an autoimmune disease increases by 20%. Our attachment styles are affected by all this. That's part of the book. We talked about that in our previous episodes. So that's what the first part of the book is about. Mm-hmm. And just to give one example, there's one example in there where she talks about a child who she goes in the station wagon with her mom with her dad and mom to his office. She's waiting a long time in the car and they're not coming back. She gets out, she looks through the window and she sees her mom's feet on the ground, like sticking out from behind a desk. And then turns out her dad had murdered her mom. Then she had to go testify in court.
Right.
And then she has a bunch of autoimmune diseases. Surprise.
Right.
That's the kind of stuff it talks about.
Yeah, the first half of the book was really, really enlightening to connect the experience and the body. And so I think you had started listening to it and got somehow far in and then wanted me to join you, and we started listening together. So the second half of the book talks about the healing journey, beginning your healing journey. And just from the book, recognizing that chronic childhood stress leads to chronic adult illness and relationship challenges can be enormously freeing, she says. If you've been wondering why you've been struggling a little too hard for a little too long with your emotional and physical well-being, feeling as if you've been swimming against some invisible current that never ceases, this aha can come as a welcome relief. Finally, you can see the current, and you know how it's been working against you all of your life. So as difficult as it was to begin to start to see the difficulties that you had, which again, this was just a few months into therapy, but, and it just cracked that open, and your finger getting cut off was the first piece that just kind of said, that had to have been traumatic. And and I don't really know what happened. And that's curious. That was that aha moment. Because like I say, we talked about that all our marriage. It wasn't like you were having this remembering moment, but you
Yeah.
called me from the mountain and just said, I think that affected me, or I think,
Yeah, it was revelatory to me because I had
yeah,
never considered it
right,
as
right,
having affected my emotional regulation or my physical health. I got over it and I'm a grown adult. Why would it be affecting me now?
right,
I mean,
right.
I just had no idea.
The second half of the book, the healing journey, beginning your healing journey, she talks about 10 things that are helpful. So this is the part of the book where it's like, how do we get better? And throughout the beginning of the book, she's, like Monty says, she's giving a bunch of different perspectives, different clients that she's had, and how understanding this helped them not only mentally and emotionally, but physically as well. And so the first thing she says to do is to take that ACE score, to figure out what your ACE score is. And she says after computing, and there's a caveat because those 10 questions aren't completely, they can't tell the whole story. And here's why. Here's why. She says, after taking the survey and computing your ACE score, ask yourself the following questions. How old was I at the time of these events? The earlier the certain patterns of adversity began, the more difficult it is for the child to understand his or her situation or find help. And then another question is it likely that there are events I don't remember? Many adverse childhood experiences happen before we are old enough to store those memories. Some of your responses may be based more on your implicit memory, that feeling, how you feel, rather than your explicit memory or the recall of specific events. No one can remember what happened in those first few years of life. You may have implicit memories that are known but not remembered, yet they still have an influence in your life. And so when you're taking that score, if you feel a little jolt or you feel like, I don't know, but that happens. I know it's common for women sometimes to say like, how you feel like you always feel like you might have been sexually abused as a kid, and it's like, no. You might not have had a memory, and our brains, like we talked about before, are really good at filtering things out that are not helpful sometimes. But the body remembers. So listen to your body when you're taking that quiz. Give yourself half a point if you're not 100% sure. But a lot of times we're not going to have an exact memory for those things. Because when they talk about like neglect, for instance, there is no memory of emotional neglect. That's the whole point that we talked about before. It's what didn't happen. So there is nothing there to remember. So just kind of be aware of that when you take the questionnaire. And then she goes on to a second thing to do. Her second thing to do is to get what she calls a resilience score. And this is about how we received support. So like I talked about in my beginning in my story, there were some traumatic events that happened kind of close together at a very young age. And because there was support, I don't know if my nervous system took that quite the same direction that it could have and should have and would have had I not had some of that mirroring, some of those early attachment and attunement experiences, like my mom listening to me intently about seeing my grandma. So I had this voice that I wasn't a voice, it was a visual, and I had a very different experience from what you did when you had a voice that was, an outer sound, felt like it might have been an outer being, like outside of you. There was a very different response there. So that resilience questionnaire is really a tough one. We had completely forgotten that this was part of childhood disrupted. We remembered the ACE score.
There's a reason for that we had forgotten.
Yeah.
It's really intense. I would like you to maybe read a few of those questions.
Okay. And also, I wanted to add that I will have a link in the show notes. I keep a link on my website to the A score on my website because I think that's really important. Also, there's a link to childhood emotional neglect. She has a similar type a survey or quiz that you can look to. You will find those in the link in the show notes. But this resilience questionnaire is to kind of, it was interesting because it's like let's look at the positives. It's kind of the idea. And as I brought it to Monty's attention this morning before we were recording, just putting some notes together, I wanted to tell him beforehand because I knew this would be tough. So the first question is, I believe that my mother loved me when I was little. And then it will give you 5 choices on each of these questions. Definitely true, probably true, not sure, probably not true, definitely not true. So I believe my mother loved me when I was little. 2, I believed my father loved me when I was little. 3, when I was little, other people helped my mother and father take care of me, and they seemed to love me. 4, I've heard that when I was an infant, someone in my family enjoyed playing with me, and I enjoyed it too. 5, when I was a child, there were relatives in my family who made me feel better when I was sad or worried. 6, when I was a child, neighbors or my friends' parents seemed to like me. 7, when I was a child, teachers, coaches, youth leaders, or ministers were there to help me. 8, someone in my family cared about how I was doing in school. 9, my family, neighbors, and friends talked often about making our lives better. 10, we had rules in our household and were expected to keep them. When I felt really bad, I could almost always find someone trusted to talk to. When I was a youth, people noticed that I was capable and could get things done. 13, I was independent and a go-getter. And 14, I believed that life is what you make it. So those are the kind of the questions. And
how many men out there are thinking about work right now? Are thinking about your to-do list, your things you can accomplish and get done, and just skipped over the whole section. Maybe don't even know what we just talked about.
Yeah, or women too.
If that's happening to you, it's okay.
Yeah.
Maybe rewind and listen at some point when you're more comfortable.
Right.
These things are important for men just as much as women.
Yeah.
Because we're both people. We're more alike than we're different.
Right. Right. And I remember asking you, I think it was not until therapy, where I asked you explicitly, do you remember coming home from school and telling your mom about your day, or having a hard day and walking in the door and needing to tell or having someone to talk to? And you had no memory, no feeling of that possibility.
There was a high.
Okay.
I don't remember too much of how was your day. Tell me what happened. Anything difficult? Anything went really well?
Like sitting around the dinner table? Was it like, tell us about your days?
Not really.
Okay. Yeah. You don't know what it would be like having the opposite. That's where it gets tricky, because it's just what didn't happen. And so you don't, there's the comparison in ourselves. So I hear you say that, and I think I wouldn't have survived school without coming home and feeling like I didn't run in the door every single day. My mom didn't meet me at the door with cookies and say, how was your lovely day? But I knew when there was an issue, I had somebody to go to. In fact, 6th grade, out on the playground, maybe this is later in life than some people would know, but my friend came to me and she's like, this kid, Chris, who is so tall, and I think he was older, I think he had to be held back a couple grades or something, and he was just big and kind of clumsy and just kind of got in trouble a lot, and she's like, Chris told me that when people have sex, they connect. And I was like, no way. I mean, like, how do they? They wrap the sheet around them and walk around the room. That's how they do it on Days of Our Lives, And so she was like, I think they might. And I was like, and so I think there was some other people there too. And I was assigned to go talk to I was like, I'll ask my mom. My mom will tell me. And I was so self-righteous because I was like, oh yeah, I'll tell you, So I'm like, Mom, listen to this. This is what they talked about at school. And she was like, well, how do you think the sperm gets to the egg? And all of a sudden, I'm hoping this was 5th grade. I think it was 6th grade, but I'm hoping it was 5th grade. I also got my first ticket, which was a bad thing in elementary school, for kicking Chris where I shouldn't have kicked him. And when I got in from recess, and my teacher calls me up to the desk. It was a big old man, big man in his like 60s, probably 50s, 60s. And he was like, Michelle, you got a ticket. And I was like, he's like, what happened? And I mean, like, I'm like, my eyes are probably really big. And I was like, he stole our thing. And I don't know what was written on the ticket. So I kicked him in the, whatever. And he was like, okay, go sit down. So I don't know where Chris is these days, but when we graduated from high school, he was working in a construction job, making a ton of money. But in elementary, he was a troublemaker and was one of the reasons why I learned about the realities of sex. Thank you for that, Chris. But, I was the one that could have those conversations with my mom. That was solid for me. I could tell her something, and I wasn't necessarily afraid, except for when I broke a piece of the nativity and hid it in my room. Now I was probably 4. I literally broke in half one of the shepherds and hid it in my room, and didn't tell my mom until she found it. And she was like, I found something a little bit. And I was like, Mommy. And I cried and cried. And, and she's snickering half the time because it's kind of funny. But I was so sad that I had done that.
I have a couple questions for you about this. So, did Chris deserve it?
Yes. Okay. Yes. Settled him down. He needed to calm down. Don't go take people's, like, we're playing volleyball and he just comes in and takes the ball. I mean, you're losing a point there. Like, how rude. Come on.
How rude.
Don't do that.
Oh my gosh, that's a funny story. And then I had another question for you. Do you think, you're the youngest of 7, do you think your siblings got the same treatment?
Probably not. So I would think that the thing is I think not. I'm sure my mom was busy. She was pregnant. I never had a pregnant mom. So there's that factor, but also they had each other. There was like every 2 years a new kid. They're all almost exactly 2 years apart, and then 6 years. And so when we get together for family dinners and they tell their adventure stories, I've just never been one of those, but they were a team, and they were a group that played together. It sounds like a lot. They were together a lot. They had their individual friends, but a lot of their memories that come up in family parties are them together going on adventures and things like that. So they were close. They were close. And I didn't have that. So there's positives and negatives from both of it. But I would say no, they probably did not have that same, although they all really are grateful for her and say that, she was an exceptional mom, because she was very mindful of 7 kids being individuals, which I think is hard to do.
Absolutely.
It's very hard to do.
I'm sure.
Now we get into kind of the modalities, and the first one is to write. And it's really interesting how simple that is. But she gives this story about this person. Her name was Kendall, and she had celiac disease, which is very common now. And she was teased and belittled by her family when she was young. And so she decided to write a document outlining the reality and the facts of her that situation as a child. Um, and she wrote down the damaging responses, and she wrote a letter to her parents, um, kind of telling them this is what happened. And her parents were asking to have more contact with her, and she wasn't comfortable with that. So she gave the document to her therapist, who met with Kendall's parents to discuss it with them. She said, "I don't have the health, energy, or inclination to reestablish a relationship with my parents," Kendall said. "So, but I need to write up the document for my well-being." And so she wrote the document and just really got out what happened from her perspective. And since writing that document, there's two things changed, it said in the book. For the first time since her diagnosis, her celiac disease is no longer considered refractory. Results from her upper GI showed that her villi had healed. She had given herself permission because she's like, no, this is the truth. So having it in writing kind of helped her feel like this was true. And so writing is so simple, but it can be really powerful. And then the second thing is sometimes though writing isn't helpful. So she says draw. And maybe it's just a matter of scribbling maybe, but that can be helpful too if you're unable to do that.
I think about Anna Runkle. She touts a practice. She encourages a practice of writing your fears and resentments.
Yeah.
And then at the end, you write a little release of them. And it doesn't have to be neat handwriting. You can rip it up and throw it away right after. It's so that the messages talk to a different part of your brain.
Yeah. And get it out of your body.
And gets it out of your body. And I did that for a long time, and it was super helpful.
It's really helpful. Yeah. So both of those things, to get it out on a piece of paper, both with writing or with drawing. And then of course she talks about mindfulness meditation and really paying attention to what we're feeling. She talks about Tai Chi and Qigong. Those are slow movement exercises kind of, and they can be really helpful. She talks about what she calls mind sight, which is really just going within. It's just kind of like meditating, but it's just asking yourself. Maybe you could talk about, it could be parts work, IFS, but it's just going within and, why do I feel that way? What do I think about that? Do I like that or not? And just being really focused inward. That's one of the modalities that's helpful. Loving kindness meditations. And there's I created a loving kindness meditation in the Wholeness Network library that you can go to, and that's really healing. A loving kindness meditation, if you've never done it, it can shift things pretty quickly. The next one is forgiveness. But I really wanted to point this out because she says, this is the definition in the book from, it's from Jack Kornfield, a PhD. He's a Buddhist meditation teacher and a psychologist. And Kornfield was the one that said forgiveness was helpful. But he says this really, really important definition of forgiveness. He says is the capacity to let go, to release the suffering, the sorrows, the burdens of the pains, and the betrayals of the past, and instead to choose the mystery of love. This doesn't mean, this is Donna talking now, this doesn't mean condoning what happened in the past or condoning anyone's behavior. Kornfield says, it's not forgive and forget. In fact, forgiveness might also include, quite understandably, the resolve to protect yourself and never let this happen again. Forgiveness isn't sentimental or quick. You can't paper things over and smile and say, I forgive. It is a deep process of the heart, And in the process, you need to honor the betrayal of yourself or others, the grief, the anger, the hurt, the fear. This, he admits, can take a long time. Indeed, he says, when you do a forgiveness practice, you may realize that you're never going to forgive that person, and never takes a while.
Some parents will tell their children, you need to forgive your parents because I had to forgive my parents. And I don't think that's helpful.
Right.
In that case, the parent who's telling you you need to forgive is really trying to just bypass responsibility.
Right.
Another thing I'd like to think about with forgiveness is forgiveness for me is like a debtor. A debtor, he's in prison, and then you have the person who provided the capital to the debtor. The person who provided the capital can forgive that debt, and then they don't need to go to court anymore. The
Right.
connection is cut, and
Mm-hmm.
therefore the forgiveness happened, the debt's forgiven, they're no longer connected to each other. And so you can have some separation.
Yep. And I think that's important. I think that's important. It's kind of a buzzword right now, going no contact. And when I hear two sides of the story, I hear one side saying, how could you do that? And the other side saying, you know, I, I just, you did this mean thing. And nobody's really saying what really is going on, and going through the journey of the pain of that, and the process of that. I was talking to my nephew this week, one of my nephews, and we talked about the nervous system dysregulation that might happen when we go to a family party. And when that dysregulation takes you out, so that now, this was what I told him. So I'm like, if I cannot be present for the people I love, then that's too high of a cost sometimes. And so, if I'm going to go and be involved in any kind of activity, and then it's going to take me 3 days, 4 days of not being myself back at home, that's too expensive. And so it's not about punishment for the people that I'm not spending as much time with. It's understanding my ability to stay well because I've been in their presence. And if you don't have an understanding of how the nervous system gets triggered in those ways, and how difficult it can be, and how much it can affect you, then boy, you're lucky, because that happens to many people. It's not just trying to win the argument and making a stand. I'm sure there's some people that's it, but I don't know if that's necessarily what people that are going no contact. They're not just trying to shame or discipline or hate on whoever they're going no contact with. It's more about self-preservation. I think that's important to say.
Yeah, thanks for saying that. That was really well stated.
Thank you. So the next thing she talks about is mending the body. So moving the body. And she talks about yoga in this section. She talks about body work. She talks about sometimes you'll be in a session, and, one of a dead grandmother's spirit will come in, and you just let that spirit guide you and teach you. And we'll talk about that in a little bit, because that was a moment when we were listening to this part of the book. She talks about managing the mind through the gut. So that's another avenue that can show up, is maybe there's issues that can really, really help. You just had a sleep study done, and last night, in fact, you said you had the best night of sleep you've had, because we just barely started to kind of treat that. That's helpful to know that those might be pieces of the puzzle to understand.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'd wake up in the middle of the night. It's sleep apnea. I'd wake up and my chest would be in a little bit of pain and my heart would be beating rapidly. I thought it was anxiety.
Yeah.
It's been happening a long time, and I'm looking forward to sleeping better. We'll keep you posted.
Yeah. Yeah. And then she talks about something called Only Connect, and that's connecting with people. So this part of the book is very much what we can do on an individual basis, pretty much, to feel better. And so connection with a group is known to be really helpful. In fact, you've probably heard the statistic that loneliness is the epidemic, and it's more deadly than other diseases. And then she goes on to about professional help and what professional help can do. And so, of course, therapy is helpful. Somatic experiencing is helpful. The guided imagery is important, that creativity, and that's a little different than meditation. So meditation would be maybe more quiet. Guided imagery is a little bit different. I prefer guided imagery meditating, honestly. So I have a lot of those on the Wholeness Network because they're just helpful for me. And then there's also, I created these just 10-minute, 5-minute, 2-minute, 3-minute increments of music. And so you can just have the music in the background, but it's easier for me to have some music or something going on for me to be able to get into that calm state of meditative state. She talks about this visualization, so we did a visualization with Money when he was younger. That's helpful. She talks about hypnosis. She talks about neurofeedback and EMDR as modalities to work toward this. Not just, again, this book isn't just healing the nervous system. This is more about literally healing the body. So my Hashimoto's is an autoimmune disease. Autoimmune diseases are highly, highly correlated with stored emotion. And I think that's part of the reason why I think women probably have, our voices are tempered. We have certain things that's a whole rabbit hole to go down, but it makes sense to me that women are more inclined to have issues with their thyroid. That in the chakra world, that is your voice. That's the imprint that you give. Nobody's voices is the same, and that area can be constricted because we're trying to be nice, or we're overly Karen, and we're overly dropping stuff on people that don't get it. We don't have a full balance in our voice. Seeing this book was so interesting, and we talked about it a little bit in our rupture episodes. But again, you had started listening to the book and then said, I would like you to listen with me. And so we would go on rides. And I remember being at the mouth of Logan Canyon when she mentioned body work.
Yeah, we switched from this, like, here's the physical problems that can come from having stress, to here's how you fix it. And when we made that jump, she got into the woo-woo stuff that I was resistant to because
Right.
I didn't value emotions.
Mm-hmm.
I had no idea how things could affect me and how this could fix it, except for one thing. I had done meditation.
Right.
And we talked about that. I'd done meditation. I got into a point where it was getting helpful. I started to feel these deep feelings, and then I felt the terror and I quit. So there was that. I did know the meditation was helpful.
Right.
But the other stuff, when she started talking about the other stuff,
right.
At first I feel defensive. You guys have probably felt some defensiveness, maybe listening to this podcast.
Yeah.
What Michelle's just been talking about. Hypnosis, therapy, somatic experiences. What even are these things?
Right.
EMDR is just making your eyes go weird. So that sort of thing. Talking about, you said we're going to talk about like bringing an ancestor into a visualization exercise. Now we're going deep. Now we're off the deep end.
That's right. And I remember she just mentioned body work, and I picked up my phone and I Googled body work, and I paused it and I was like, Money, do you know what body work is? And I said it, but like, honestly, as I'm telling you, I'm really nervous. Like, am I just making this up? That feeling of like, what's he going to say? And you were like, what? I felt like you were just like, what? Are you kidding me? Like you handled it well.
Part of me was a little angry. Part of me was really surprised.
Right.
And part of me was comforted knowing that
your wife wasn't nuts.
What you had been doing was valuable and I could connect with you on this possibly.
Right. So a few pages later, I should say, this is the moment. It says, in a therapeutic touch, a therapist trained to be sensitive to the client's energy field. Wait, where did it go?
I still have a hard time with energy field and energy work, that name. But if
Right,
I think about it as emotional field and emotional work, for me, that's more, I can handle that. It's more palatable.
right, right. Okay, right. So let me read that. It says, in therapeutic touch, a therapist trained to be sensitive to the client's energy field works with that field without ever touching the patient. Other such modalities include Reiki, massage, and craniosacral work. Whatever modality you choose, the important thing is to find a practitioner-client relationship in which you felt safe. Mary, this in the book, felt that she was aided in her healing by body work with a medical, intuitive, energetic healer. Quote.
You can't even still believe that I'm talking about this with you. It's so out there.
Right. It was out there for me too at the
Yeah.
beginning. It was out there for
Oh,
me too.
yeah.
And so in my rupture episode 2, that went on and on and on for a long time. And uh, so when we edited it, I cut out a section and we're going to add it to this episode at the end of this episode because I'm sharing with Mani the first time I meditated and what that was like for me. And I hadn't told him. I think that had happened probably 2017, maybe 16. And I'm not telling him this is 2020 at this point, probably, that we're really talking about this. I had had a really meaningful experience just the first time I tried it. And so that's why I couldn't deny that or didn't, I was a believer in that there was something here. There was something here. And is there stuff that is beyond woo woo and can it get out of hand? Absolutely. Absolutely. I'll be the first to say not every energy healer is, I wouldn't recommend. Same with every therapist, same with every doctor. And so it takes a lot of care. And I am particularly really sensitive because when I got my Reiki training, in fact, I keep the note in my phone. The first time I had the Reiki training, I wrote down kind of a manifesto for myself because I thought people are coming to this world when they can't get answers elsewhere. And so they are at their most vulnerable. And my first job is to help them trust in themselves to know what's going to be beneficial to them more than it is for me to just work on them and fix them. My job is for them to start to be able to feel inside of themselves what's helpful, because they can get taken advantage of. And I would go to conferences and things, and you'd see people just there desperate to have this healer person fix them. And the healer person has those tools and shares those tools, but we're not even getting into the pain and the suffering that they're going through. It's like we're not pausing and saying, that's really painful. I remember being in a conference and this lady stood up and she's like, my husband's back home in the hospital. We were in Arizona. I think her husband was back in Massachusetts. She's like, I had to leave his bedside to come here because I know that coming here would fix him. And I just thought, okay, like I'm not going to say that's impossible, but also I think we're bypassing through. You're in a lot of pain here. You're feeling some desperation and you're having a little bit of trauma with what's going on here, and that it kind of needs to be named, kind of like writing it down. Like we have to understand what the dynamics are that are affecting us. We can't just seek the solution. We have to understand on some level. And although that's difficult, and sadly our default is to kind of push that away, that's an important step. Maybe we don't need to have every detail of the memory, but we need to believe our bodies when they tell us, when the hairs lock up on the back of our neck when we see an uncle that makes us feel uncomfortable. We've got to believe that. Or if we just feel around someone, we just can't feel like we can't be ourselves. We've got to believe that. Like the story isn't isn't as important as the body reaction, the reaction that your body will have.
Trust your body.
Mm-hmm.
There's wisdom in there.
Yep, that's right. So anyway, so we're going to share that piece of that podcast with you and see what it was like to kind of re-experience that first meditation. First time I meditated, my sister-in-law had kind of said, hey, why don't you just get quiet? You know, she kind of gave me some parameters. I don't remember how much she gave me, but what I ended up doing was, she says, ask for a gift. Just ask for a gift with whoever shows up, you know? And I'm like, and I remember going into our closet because it could be dark in there and meditating for the first time. I would call it meditating. And very quickly, you know, it took a few minutes, a couple of minutes. I'm just sitting there. Of course, you're just like, is this it? I don't know. You know, you're thinking about the grocery list, you know, all of a sudden a thought starts to stick. And I saw an image of this great gulf. And in fact, in my mind, it's like on the third Indiana Jones, where he's got to have the leap of faith and he throws the dirt on there to see that it's actually a narrow pathway. That's kind of how it really looked. It was just a very narrow pathway with very much this gulf on each side. And there was this inkling of making it through or across this. There was a journey, and it was going to be this hard journey. And I thought, well, I'll just fall off. You know, if I die, that's okay. I'll just make it easy. I'll just quickly fall off. Like, that was the thing. And whatever it was, more a feeling than words, but a little more clear. It was, no, we want you to make the whole trip. We want you to go across. We want you to make it. This isn't about easy. This is about making it. You know, it was almost very much going through, moving forward. Like, don't just stay here and play safe. Like, it was an invitation to grow. And over the next few years, I would return back to that and find myself further than like at one point past the Gulf, but in a desert, you know, and then maybe we're in a little bit of an oasis right now. And that kind of became a symbol for me in progression of where I was. But at the end of that first one, you know, I asked for a gift, and all of a sudden I saw this little tiny fir tree, and it was very significant that it was a fir tree. And at first I felt like, yeah, that's about right. I feel so prickly. That's how it felt. I felt like I was the fir tree and nobody wanted to touch me with a 10-foot pole. And then I felt these arms just hold me and loved my prickliness. Loved my prickliness. That's because if that's who I was, all the more, that's why I love you. You know, it was the most tender feeling I'd ever had. And even kind of sometimes in those, I'd be like, am I just making this up? You know, I'd kind of come out of it a little bit. Am I just making it up? But I could continue. I couldn't distract myself from it. And that was a really pivotal point for me when I started to get quiet and trust that I could get answers, and didn't tell anybody, you know, very, very, very few people. And especially a few years after we were in therapy and I could begin to tell you some of those experiences, that was, felt like to me, you picking me up out of that hole and carrying me and kissing me and holding me. You know, it was like, it was so meaningful to me that you believed me on one hand, or, you know, we had just done enough work that it didn't take you out or whatever. I don't feel like you had to effort that we had done enough work that you could take that and now as I've shared some of those experiences with you, you've been really supportive of me in ways I could never have imagined. And I would not have been where I am. There's, I would say, hundreds, at least, people in this world that I would say owe you a piece of their happiness because I got the training and was able to help them on that individual basis. That would have never been in my reference. I would have kept in my ego. I would have kept trying to build the outside of me, I wouldn't have done that without that rupture. There's no way. I just know myself. I would have kept the status quo, getting nicer cars, going on nicer trips. And inside, I probably would have been fine. I don't think I would have been miserable necessarily, but the deep gratitude I have now for where I've come from and what I can now offer the world, it's really, really meaningful to me. And I don't think I could trade it. And I know I wouldn't be here without it.
This is a podcast about what happens when old wounds meet adult love. We're talking about the patterns we didn't choose, the triggers we don't understand, and the moments where love feels harder than it should. We share missteps, the breakthroughs, and the deep inner work needed to stop surviving and start truly connecting. This isn't a story about perfect healing or flawless relationships. It's about awareness, compassion, and choosing growth again and again. It's about learning how to build safety, trust, and intimacy when those things weren't modeled for us. If you've ever wondered why relationships feel heavier than you expect, if you love but struggle to feel seen, safe, or understood, if you want healing, stay with us, because healing isn't out of reach. We're not here to save marriages or lower the divorce rate. This isn't therapy, it's education with a focus on harm reduction, personal agency, and making life a little easier. We do that through storytelling and sharing perspectives. These are our stories, filtered through our own lens. Anytime we talk about other people, that's just our perception, not capital T truth.